Good evening everyone and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight, the 1st of April 2014. My name's Chris Nitzo and tonight I guess our big topic of conversation is the tropical low that is forming in the Solomon Sea near the Solomon Islands, between the Solomon Islands and PNG. So most of our update tonight will be focused on that. And also we'll talk about the MJO and a Rossby Wave pushing westwards. The two systems combined could create a little bit of mischief over the Australian tropics over the next couple of weeks. So let's get into tonight's update. Now what we're going to find over the next couple of weeks is that this area of convection that is just starting to pop its ugly head up just occasionally here in the last 24 hours, we're going to see this area of convection become enhanced over the next couple of weeks. Now that's going to be a slow and gradual process. Now what we're also going to see is that this area of amazing amount of cloud out here in the Solomon Islands, the far northern Coral Sea and PNG is going to push in a westerly direction towards the Torres Strait and far northern Cape York Peninsula. So all of that mess is pushing towards the west. That's also going to happen quite slowly, and what we will see, or what we should see, what we should see is a tropical low form initially and then develop and push westwards in the medium term. Now let's have a look at what some of our global computer models are suggesting will happen in the short to medium term, and then we'll have a closer look at what we might expect in the longer term. In fact, it might be interesting to note that the Bureau of Meteorology has already suggested that this low has currently formed to the south of the Solomon Islands around 157.5 east, 95 south. The low is expected to remain slow moving and significant development is not expected over the next 3 days. However, there is the chance, and it's not a high chance just yet, but it's a low to moderate chance of it forming into a cyclone in the medium term as it pushes west towards the very, very far northern parts of Queensland in the longer term. Now let's have a look at those computer models. The first one we're going to have a look at is the Bureau of Meteorology's 3-day access regional model. Now this model is fairly high resolution and it will show us I guess what the access model is predicting for the region. Now you can see here already by tomorrow morning that low located in the Solomon Sea in the far northern tip of the Coral Sea, and as we head towards the 48-hour mark we see that the system doesn't move anywhere. So by 10 o'clock Thursday it's still lying in exactly the same spot that it has been. You can see some really nice convergence area here to the east, northeast and southeast of the low. And then in 72 hours it does show signs of just a little bit of development, not significant development, but there is certainly a sign there that it tightens up a little bit more. You can see this convergence area really starting to tighten up a little bit more than it has the first 48 hours. So by Friday morning it starts to drift in a west-southwesterly direction, and that's probably the direction we're expecting it to continue drifting in the longer term. If we look at the upper levels, you can see here the mid-level charts at 500 hectopascals. Really, most of the flow is from east to west, so there should be nothing really to push this system southwards or southeastwards, at least in the short to medium term. So as it forms, it's likely to, especially once it deepens, push in a west, possibly even a west-northwest direction, some of the models suggesting. So that's from the access region. If we take a look at the GFS, Global Forecasting System model from America, we can see that the system is expected to form out here near the Solomons, push in a south-southeast direction over the next day or two. That's because it's really, really weak and it's governed by the low-level winds. And as it starts to strengthen just a little bit, it eventually hits the skids and pushes directly westwards. And I guess that's where we're expecting it to continue to push. However, the GFS model in the longer term completely weakens this system out. Now, you can see sort of two areas here of interest in the GFS modeling. This area here is associated with an MJO pulse moving eastwards. This area here is associated with an active phase of the Rossby Wave moving westwards. So this area of activity is pushing westwards. This area of activity is pushing eastwards. So I guess the issue lies what will happen in the longer term. So at the moment we're only going out to 5 days, but if we start to look more at the 2-week range, we start to see that the potential exists for the Rossby Wave to be located right over the top of Australia and the MJO to be located right over the top of, maybe not all of Australia, more so the very far northern parts of Australia, PNG, Indonesia region. So I guess if those two systems combine, one moving west, the other moving east, those will seek to compound each other, and the potential then exists for a very active phase of weather around far northern Australia, the PNG region, the Arafura Sea, the Timor Sea, and obviously with that comes the increased threat for tropical cyclone formation in the region. Looking at the UK model, now the UK model is one of the most aggressive in developing this into quite a significant tropical cyclone. So once again, you can see the two areas of interest here in the UK model, that eastward moving pulse of the MJO and the westward moving Rossby wave. Now, I guess the big thing with this one is that the UK develops this into a category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone, possibly even stronger than that, as it pushes westwards towards the far northern tip of Queensland. Now, it's a fine line, folks, as to whether this will impact PNG. Now, if it impacts PNG, obviously the chances of it forming into a tropical cyclone and hitting Queensland are going to be limited. But if it doesn't hit PNG, then the chances increase quite dramatically of the system developing significantly into a TC as it pushes to the similar type of scenario from the FIM8 model, which is an experimental model using a lot of the GFS physics set. And so we see a fairly similar track to the GFS here, west-southwest, although the FIM model wants to really intensify the system also into a category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone, pushing it in a little bit more of a southerly direction and pushing it more into the central/northern Coral Sea. Once again, you can see the active phase of the MJO creating a little bit of mischief out here in the Indian Ocean as well. So once again, these are two separate climatic systems here. This is a Rossby wave, this is a MJO. They're both moving towards the Australian continent over the next 2 weeks. So as I said, the wet season, and certainly more so the cyclone season, is not over. Once again, Canadian CMC model, very similar to the other models. We've got this mischief out here in the central Indian Ocean, and we've got more out here in the Coral Sea. Same sort of suggestion of track out to the southwest and then west as it heads towards Queensland. The even higher resolution of the FIM model, this is a very, very high resolution model, almost like as high as the European, in fact. We see a very similar track to the lower resolution FIM model, which is to be expected. But same thing, westward moving tropical cyclone in the Coral Sea and a southward moving tropical lower cyclone in the Indian Ocean. The NavGem model, not a very accurate model, but one that we will have a look at regardless, keeps the Coral Sea system very, very weak on its track to the west, and also develops this Indian Ocean system. And you can really see, I guess, on the NavGem really quite clearly how this pulse of the MJO, just in terms of its cloud cover and rainfall cover, you can really see out here that the MJO pushing towards the east here. Not so much worried about where the cyclone's going, it's more about where this area of rain and cloud is heading as we head towards the 1 week period. So as I say, as the MJO should push over Australia, not this week, probably later on next week and into the week after. And so as we head towards the end of the 2nd week of April and the start of the 3rd week of April, that's when things could be happening up here for Australia. Now that's with regards to the MJO. The Rossby wave obviously will create a little bit of mischief for Queensland and the Northern Territory / Arafura region a little bit earlier than that. Now I'll show you some of the OLR diagrams, outgoing long wave radiation diagrams for those particular systems, just so you can tell what I'm talking about a little bit clearer. And last but certainly not least is the European model, and the European model also sees that the system in the Coral Sea pushes in a westerly direction, although the European model is much less interested in developing this into anything significant. So I guess normally what we find is the European and the UK Met model have fairly similar ideas on development potential of tropical cyclones, yet at the moment they're differing quite remarkably, whereas this is the Euro model, and once again I'll show you the UK model. And you can see the UK model differing quite significantly by developing this into quite an intense tropical cyclone at the 5-day mark. So obviously there's a lot of disagreement there in the model guidance as to how this thing will progress as it heads westwards in terms of its development. There's not much, I guess, guidance variation in the track forecast. The track forecast is expected to head towards southern tip of PNG, very, very far northern parts of Queensland. But there is a lot of deviation in the intensity forecasts of the system, and so that's why while the Bureau are giving it almost no chance of development in the next 3 days, it does need to be watched in the longer term. So if we take a look at some guidance ensemble variation here, and we can see that overall in the European model, we are definitely seeing a signature here of a tropical low in most of the model guidance, and if not a tropical low, certainly a trough, but overall more than likely going to see a low. Now this is out to 3 days, so this is out to Friday morning. We can see that the low is most likely to be located in that circle region. Then by day 5, the low is on the move. Now you can see that on day 3 it was located out here south of the Solomons. By day 5, which is this Sunday, we see that the low overall is on the move out towards the west, towards the southern tip of PNG. Now remember, if it misses the southern tip of PNG and continues westwards along the northern Coral Sea, it will see an increased chance of developing into a tropical cyclone. Obviously, the guidance in the European model suggests otherwise. It suggests that it does make some sort of contact with this mountainous area of Papua New Guinea, and obviously with that situation, we're going to see it wreck the structure of the tropical low as it pushes over the top, and it's going to take a little bit of time before it regains its structure as it heads west towards the Arafura Sea. And by day 7, you can see that what I was talking about there, that overall the European model, the reason it keeps such a low potential for this thing to develop into a cyclone is that it does make contact here with PNG, and because it does so, the low pressure system, I guess, weakens, its structure really weakens out. However, the remnant structure, or the remnant low-level circulation centre, remains intact in the Euro in the longer term, and we see potential increase dramatically for it to form into a tropical cyclone up here in the Arafura Sea in the long term. Now this is, we're talking a very long way away. This is only next Tuesday, but what we're talking about in terms of it I guess the chances of it improving into forming a cyclone, if it hits PNG, are up here off the top end coastline. Now it is likely, should it remain intact in this area at this point in time, remembering of course what we said at the start of this broadcast, where we have an MJO that should be pushing right over the top of the area at around about day 10 to 15, and we have a Rossby Wave which is pushing westwards and should meet up over the northern parts of Australia by around about day 10. So as the two systems, as these two major weather systems come together, and if we have a remnant circulation of this tropical low still in the area, we will see conditions dramatically improve for its development into a tropical cyclone in the long term. However, don't discount the fact that this could still form into a cyclone before making it onto the far northern Queensland coast, just purely and simply if it misses the southern tip of PNG and remains a little bit further to the south than the current modelling from the Euro suggests. The chances, as I say, improve dramatically for it to form into a tropical cyclone on its way towards Queensland. And now as we head towards day 10, you can see exactly what I was talking about. You can start to see some of the outlying models developing this tropical cyclone much stronger tropical low up here to the north of the Northern Territory coastline. So in the longer term, I guess we have to watch for the NT coastline being affected by this. In the medium term, we have to watch the far northern coast, anywhere from Cairns northwards could be affected by this system, but particularly the area Cooktown northwards, I guess, is the hotspot region for this particular one. Now remember, that's still 5 to 7 days away before it shows its ugly head and shows us exactly what it wants to do. And then for the Northern Territory, we're looking at the 10 to 14 day mark. If we take a much longer look at the GFS ensemble, we can see that overall the ensemble is much keener to develop a tropical low out here off the Kimberley coastline rather than this stuff heading westwards across the far northern Coral Sea and into the Northern Territory. So once again, model guidance is pretty keen on developing something over or near Australia over the next couple of weeks. It's just a matter of where. Now at this stage, obviously the GFS model would be an outlying type scenario. At this stage, we would more expect the Coral Sea system to be the catalyst of developing the next tropical low, significant tropical low or tropical cyclone over northern Australia. Now once again, we're not sure if it develops into a cyclone out here or develops into a cyclone out here, depending on how it interacts with PNG. Or obviously option 3, whether it develops into a cyclone at all. But look, if it doesn't develop into a cyclone, it should develop into a significant low pressure system as it pushes westwards in the long term. So without regards as to whether it makes cyclone status or not, we should see an increase in rainfall over the far northern peninsula and over the top end coastline as we head towards weeks 1 to 2. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about here is the MJO, and we can see that in the MJO diagrams from the Bureau of Meteorology, the Bureau of Meteorology modelling is suggesting the MJO is going to push eastwards very, very rapidly. Now, we probably won't see such rapid movement of the MJO as what the Bureau are predicting. So by days 1 to 5, so by day 5, we could see the MJO pushing cloud cover and rainy conditions all the way eastwards towards far northern Queensland. Probably an unlikely scenario. It's more than likely going to be the Rossby Wave that pushes westwards, that pushes this cloud cover into northern Queensland, whereas the MJO proper will remain over the southeast Indian Ocean. And as we head to days 6 to 10, the MJO is located right over the top of Australia, according to the Bureau of Meteorology. And then as we head to days 11 to 15, it heads out into the Coral Sea. Now, as I said, this is probably, and also, by the way, weakens. This is probably a little fast, but it could still be the case. Now, let's have a look at what the MJO phase diagram suggests it will do. Now you can see the MJO phase diagram from the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting. We can see here that the MJO will push rapidly into the central Indian Ocean over the next 24 to 48 hours, possibly intensify a little further. And that's with regards to the development of the tropical low that I've shown you on every single global model, suggesting a development of a tropical low in the central Indian Ocean. Now that will enhance the MJO signal. Now as the MJO pushes eastwards over the first week, so by day 7 it's located over the far western parts of the Australian or maritime continent. And then as we head towards 8, 9, 10, day 8, 9, 10, we see the MJO weaken, but located over the Northern Territory. Now this is why, folks, this is why we think that the tropical low, as it heads west across the Coral Sea and heads in towards the Arafura Sea, will find it much better potential for it to form into a TC. So by day 10, it's located basically smack bang over the Northern Territory, the MJO signal, or over the Arafura Sea. And so even though the MJO signal is weakening, it still is located right in the hot spot at day 10. Before pushing further east towards Queensland or far northern parts of Queensland or far northern parts of the peninsula and PNG as we head to days 14, 15, 16. Now there's considerable disagreement between the model guidance because the UK Met has the same type of thing happening over the next 48 hours before the MJO hits just on the far western tip of Australian or the maritime continent and then just dies completely, and I mean completely, just dead in the water after about the end of the first week of April, folks. So there's a lot of disagreement as to how strong the signal is going to be as it pushes across the far northern parts of Australia, Indonesia and PNG. Now, obviously with the UK Met scenario, now don't forget they're developing a very, very strong tropical low or cyclone in the Coral Sea, remembering that forecast I showed you. So they're developing a cyclone in that area, and that's obviously going to play havoc with the MJO signal, especially since that tropical cyclone will be associated with a Rossby wave and not the MJO. And very similar from the NCEP guidance, which is the GFS model, we can see that over the next 6 or 7 days, the MJO will be quite active over the southeast Indian Ocean and then just die completely before starting to reform towards mid-April in phase 1 around Africa. Now here's the other wave. Now remember that the MJO, or the pulse of the MJO, pushes in a west to east direction. So once again, I do apologise for the arrows, I'll try that again. From a west to east direction. Now, the Rossby wave pushes from an east to west direction. Now, an enhanced period or an enhancement of that Rossby wave as it pushes, that gravity wave, as it pushes westwards, the blue shading here suggests rain, storms and increased convection compared to the average. So what we're after is this blue shading, and we can see that at the moment over the next few days, over the last few days, that area of activity has been in the Solomon Islands and just to the east, and we saw that on the satellite at the start of this broadcast. Now, in the next 5 days, that area will start to progress westwards. So it'll lie between the Solomon Islands and the far northern tip of the Queensland coastline. But overall will lie somewhere in the Solomon Sea between PNG and the Solomons. Now, as we head towards days 6 to 10, now remember, at day 10, the MJO is likely to be up in this area. At day 10, the Rossby Wave, or the active phase of the Rossby Wave, is likely to be over the top of this area here in the Arafura Sea. So we've got one pushing west to east, we've got the other one pushing east to west, and they're both fairly active. And so as these two systems come together, if there is a low pressure system in that area, that is where we're going to see development. So I'm hoping that makes things a little bit clearer for you. Now bear in mind, once again, as I mentioned, that if the Coral Sea tropical low does not make contact with PNG and remains in the northern Coral Sea as it heads westwards, it will encounter some favourable conditions in the environment as we head to days 4 to 7 as it approaches the far northern Queensland coastline. So that is something to also bear in mind, that it may form a little earlier than the combination of these two weather systems suggests. So rainfall tomorrow, pretty well bugger all, unless you're under a couple of thunderstorms in this trough system that extends out to the Kimberley. Also some thunderstorms over the western top end, some really nice storms over the last couple of days over there. Some pretty active conditions up here, but off the coast of the peninsula, and also some showers popping onto the far northern Queensland coast, maybe even a shower or two on the central Queensland coast, and also some very isolated activity near the border and the southern inland parts of Queensland. As we head to Thursday, we see the trough system here pushing eastwards. Still some isolated showers and storms developing on the western top end, the Kimberley pushing into the inland parts of WA. We're going to see a decrease in shower activity over the northern tropics around the extreme coastal areas, and continuation of just some isolated activity in the peninsula region. Now as we head towards Friday, we start to see the Coral Sea becoming a little bit more active here, and some of that activity pushing to the west. We see a re-increase in isolated shower activity over the tropical coastline and the central Queensland coastline. And we also see a slight increase in shower and storm activity, and a more generally broad region of shower and storm activity over the western Northern Territory and northeastern parts of WA. As we head to the weekend, though, this is where things start to happen in the Coral Sea. This is where the tropical low starts to show some signs of intensification. Now, as we said, depending on how close it gets to PNG, will depend on whether it can make it into a TC, become quite strong as a low as it pushes westwards, or will completely die as it hits PNG itself. We also see an increase in shower and storm activity over the northern Kimberley region, and the western top end will continue to see some isolated shower and storm activity. And also the Goldfields part of WA will also see an increase in shower and storm activity, although that's outside of our area. Also in Queensland, just some isolated showers around the Hervey Bay coastline, and possibly even the far southeastern parts of Queensland on the weekend. So folks, following on from that, it's obviously the next 4 days that we're going to be watching with bated breath, because the first 4 days are all pretty boring. The next 4 days, what we're expecting to see is a northwesterly cloud band, which is going to push some massive rainfall into here. And then we're also going to see that tropical low or cyclone in the Coral Sea pushing westwards, hitting the Queensland coast, or being just north of the Queensland coast, and then continuing westwards into the Arafura Sea. So that's the plan at this stage, and we'll talk more about this area here of rainfall, which is going to be quite substantial over many parts of inland Northern Territory, inland WA, and possibly even inland South Australia as well. And we're also going to be talking a lot more about this one here in the Coral Sea as things get more interesting with it. But for the next couple of days, not much happening. As I said, the activity will start to happen over the weekend and into next week as that MJO pushes east, the Rossby Wave pushes west, and things should start going good for everyone who wants some rain in the far northern parts of the tropics. Now remember, that activity not going to head too far to the south. It's going to remain in the far northern parts of the tropics, and I guess that's where we'd expect it to be in April. Thanks very much for watching tonight. Our next update is on Friday, because once again the Australian continent is not under threat by any tropical cyclones over the next 3 days. However, after Friday, we'll have to reassess, and we may need to start issuing nightly updates depending on the prognosis of the Coral Sea tropical low. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk again Friday. Good night.